You're listening to the Reds Podcast.
This is episode number 109. I've got comedian Rik Roberts with me. We're talking about things you can learn from a comic. If you're a writer, podcaster, blogger, or speaker, you want to make more money, connect with an audience, and have impact, listen up. That's coming up on this episode.
This is the Red Podcast. Real entrepreneur development. Make more money, work less, and live a life of freedom. No BS advice that really works. Here's your hosts, David Hooper and Laurel Staples.
Rik Roberts is in the co-host seat. You're taking over for my wife, Laurel.
I apologize for the drop-off in looks, but I may pay more attention to you. I'm not sure.
There's nothing weird about two men in a closet.
No, as long as we stay in it.
Filled in with recording equipment. You're a working comic. 90 gigs last year, and you actually scaled that back because the last time I talked to you, you'd done something like 190.
It was like 160 or 100. I was doing quite a bit, but I've got the two young kids now, and I've found a way to work smarter, not harder, and not be on the road all the time. And when I'm out there, making the absolute most of it.
And that's what we're going to talk about today because comics have a lot to teach writers, podcasters, bloggers, and speakers. Strangely enough, you did a gig right before this recording.
Yeah, 6 minutes away. That's what made it so convenient.
6 minutes away and a 7-minute gig.
That's right.
But as I say in my blog, 23 hours, it's not the 1 hour you perform, it's the 23 hours that it takes to get there. Talk about that gig, because I think this is really important. This is why we write, why we perform, why we podcast.
Sure. Well, I'm here in Nashville, and we have a group of comics here that meet up once a month at the Hope Lodge. And the Hope Lodge is a building. It's like an apartment building for people that are going through cancer treatments and their families, so they can feel a little more comfortable than sitting in a hotel room for a whole month or whatever the treatment plan is, sometimes as long as 6 weeks or eight weeks even. And we put on a 1-hour comedy show for them. We have somebody cater the meal and bring it in and serve it to them, do the show, then hang out with them afterwards and kind of let them know that we're there for them and thank them for being there for us, because what we get out of it, besides the chance to serve a little bit and hang out, we all try out some new material. And to be honest with you, if the folks that are going through what they're going through laugh at anything that we do, it's a solid joke. And they'll tell us that afterwards, like, you know what, I didn't think I could laugh tonight, but you made me laugh.
Yeah. Well,
so it's a nice trade-off.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about a true talent. It's like watching a movie and you forget that it's a movie. You forget that those people are not really criminals.
Right.
Or Charlie's Angels or cops or whatever they're pretending to be. You can take people away from the humdrum life and into your world.
Yeah, you just escape for an hour. And it also helps us escape from ourselves for an hour, because I think comics are pretty self-absorbed to a degree. And you can think too much about what's in it for me and I'm doing this and people got to know about this. But for 1 hour, the focus shifts around. And honestly, I wish we could do it every week, but right now they're once a month.
When you're doing a gig, let's say at a comedy club, do you feel that it's kind of Groundhog Day, the same thing over and over again? Like you can only see about 2 rows from the stage because the lights are shining in your face.
Right.
Is it the same thing over and over again?
It can be if you allow it to be. And there's definitely times where you need to have a set act so you get booked and you're bookable and you're dependable and you're consistent. But if you stick in that same act for too long, it does feel like it. So you need to find ways to make it fresh for yourself on stage, work in new material. Try, even if you're doing the same material, try to deliver it in a different way. Pause in different places. Make the focus shift in different ways. So with all the comics that I have in my classes and all the comics that I kind of work with, we always have at least one goal for every time we hit the stage to get better. If not, you really are just spinning your wheels.
Well, I think that's one of the big lessons of comics that people can learn from. So let's start with that, is testing and tracking. Comedy is one of those things where, like a book author, for example, you've got a first draft, second draft, and people see the final draft. But comedy, the only way to learn it and to get better at it is do it in front of a live audience.
Right. You want to make sure before you get in front of a live audience, you've got it crafted the best you can. You know, we spend a lot of times writing, rewriting, and really trying to get it down to the fewest words possible. It's all an economy of words with comics. So the less time we spend setting something up, the quicker we get to the laugh. And the more laughs per minute you have, that's what lets the audience know that you're funny. If you and I both went up there and you got 20 laughs in 3 minutes and I got 6, the crowd's going to think you're funnier. And the difference is you got to your laughs quicker.
Pacing, that's another good lesson then too.
Absolutely.
I think certainly something for books, bloggers, podcasters. You're a podcaster too. Schooloflaughs.com has your podcast, and the podcast known as School of Laughs. Search for it in iTunes. It's fantastic. There's so many parallels between comedy, blogging, writing, podcasting. Now I lost my train of thought, Rick.
Well, there are a lot of similarities, Dave. What I like about it is here's the thing. When you're a comic and you're on stage, and whether you're up there for 5 minutes, 30, or an hour, you really can't stop. You've got to keep the ball moving. And with podcasting, we could talk about this because I've been doing podcasting since July 1st. I think we're 26 or 27 episodes into it. And it's interesting. I've got a co-host 90% of the time, and we keep it moving pretty well. But if you're a solo podcaster, you almost need to think like an improv comic in some ways because you might run into a wall at some point. And what you just did right there, if we keep it in, was great. You acknowledged what happened, right? If I was on stage and sometimes when I'm working in new material, it has to go somewhere and there's no natural place for it to fit because it's new. And I might lock up for a second and I'll just look at the audience and go, okay, this happens with new material, and just kind of be honest about it.
I'm inspired by you. I am going to keep that in.
Keep it in.
Normally we edit that stuff out, but there are a lot of things that you can learn from improv, not only just doing a solo podcast, but also when you have guests. Like I saw a great clip. Martin Short.
Absolutely.
SCTV, a huge history of being a comedian for probably, 40 years at least?
Oh, he's been an entertainer his whole life.
Did you see this interview he did with Kathy Lee Gifford?
I don't know. Tell me about it.
Kathy Lee, whatever show she's on now, she's like, well, tell me about your wife. I know you're just madly in love. But speaking of cancer, Short's wife had died 4 years earlier from cancer. She didn't know it, and he just rolled with it. Oh, yeah, we're more in love than ever. Every day is just better than the next. And he just rolled with it. And in the break, there's funny clips of this on YouTube. She comes back and she's like, I apologize. I had no idea. But they asked him about it later. And he's like, we just roll with the punches. That's what show business is. And
right.
I think you can learn from comics about that because, man, I've seen some comics die on stage and it's painful. But if you can just hold it there, and a lot of those guys do, sometimes you can get them back.
Yeah. Here's the thing that it took me a while to understand. I've been doing stand-up 23 years, almost 24 now, which is mind-boggling to me. But the thing about doing stand-up is trusting yourself on stage, trusting your point of view. And if you've written the material ahead of time, you know what the focus should be of the joke. And then also separating your jokes from you. It's really hard to do as a stand-up because you're up there bearing your soul sometimes, and you feel if they don't laugh at what you just said, that they don't like you.
Yeah.
But all it is they didn't like the joke, or you didn't say the joke correctly, or it's not there yet. So you have to still look at trying a new joke out as a victory on stage. If it bombed or it failed, you at least know what you need to fix. A comedian's products are their jokes. So if I'm on stage for an hour and I have 60 different jokes, I've got 60 products. If one doesn't sell, I fix it. But it's the product, it's not me.
I did an interview with a guy named Jia Jiang who came from Beijing, China. It's episode 103. Go to redpodcast.com/103 if you're interested in that. This guy is what he calls rejection therapy, and you would be like the dean of rejection school as a comic. 100 days, he went out, tried to get rejected, and he would do things like, hey, can I borrow $100? Just ask random people that. Hey, could I have a burger refill? One time he showed up at a guy's house with a bag of chips during the Super Bowl, asked to get in his party, doing things like that. It built up his tolerance for that. What lessons have you learned from rejection, from bombing jokes, from just all the craziness that can happen on stage?
You have to develop some thick skin. And what I always think in the back of my head if something's not going right is that everybody sitting down in the crowd tonight didn't even have the guts to get up here, didn't have the guts to take a chance on their day job and pursue something else. So if they're judging me at all, shame on them, right? If they're judging my material, that's fine. That's what I think they're there for. But if they're not connecting with me as a person, that just might be where they're coming from. You have to really, really have that thick skin. And it's okay to agitate sometimes. It's okay to have people disagree with you. There's a saying in comedy that any reaction is a good reaction. If the crowd groans, boom, you've got them in a spot. You can hit them really hard with the punchline and make them laugh twice as hard for groaning in the first place. So as long as you're getting some kind of feedback, you're doing okay.
I've said the same thing about musicians. You remember the good music, and you remember the William Hungs of the world, the
right.
really, really bad stuff. It's that creamy, mediocre sludge in the middle that you don't remember. And you think about going to a comedy club. How many people are on stage every night? Maybe 5?
Well, a typical show is 3. If it's a weeknight early in the week, they might have a showcase night where a few people pop in that are trying to get work at the club. By the time Friday and Saturday rolls around, though, they've got usually the opener, the middle, and the headliner.
There's a lot for you to get lost in, though, especially when it's just you and a mic. So sometimes being the worst guy, at least you're memorable.
Right. Yeah, if all else fails, at least they know who you are. One little trick we used to use early is to make sure you say your name in your material 3 or 4 times. You know, my dad used to say, "Rick, what are you doing out there?" And you'd say your name so at least they could remember your name on the way out. And half the battle for a comedian is to have something out there, whether it's a catchphrase or a callback that people identify with. So even if they forgot your name, they can call the comedy club and say, "Hey, when's that you might be a redneck guy coming back?"
Mm-hmm.
They may not have remembered Foxworthy early on, but they remembered his catchphrase.
And that's probably his website, too. That's another great way to get people to remember you, like a catchphrase.com.
Sure.
Like funniest man in America, James Gregory, very funny guy. It's funniestman.com.
And there's a lot of comics that have really hard to pronounce names, let alone hard to spell. Kostaki Economopoulos doesn't go by that on his website. He's got something else that's a little bit shorter.
Well, Rik Roberts,
yeah,
R-I-K.
Yeah. Short story, when I was coming out of college, I did a little bit of acting here and there, joined a couple of unions, and I couldn't have the same name as anybody else that had already been in the union. And so we went through every variation of Rick, Richard, everything, and finally the spelling it R-I-K got the green light.
Yeah, but there's a wrestler or something named Rik Roberts, right?
Now there is.
Yeah, you were there first.
If you Google search the images Rik Roberts, you'll see 50 skinny guys and one guy that's about 550 pounds. I'm the skinnier guy.
You're the skinny guy. Yeah, right.
in that particular one.
Let's talk about developing yourself as a comic, because I think something that comics do right, at least the successful comics, that podcasters, bloggers, anybody making a living online as a personality should do, is you have a point of view. You have a personality. You kind of hinted at that. How is that developed?
Well, it takes time. It takes quite a bit of time. And a lot of newer comics think they've got to start with that and then build their act around it, which can really actually be that paralysis by analysis thing. You start taking jokes off the page that you don't think fits what you think you are. What you need to do is get out there and do 100 gigs, kind of hear what you sound like, understand what the audience responds to, and kind of go from there. And you'll find your point of view and your comic voice eventually. And when you do, you lock and load on that. But you don't want to limit yourself early on.
That's the same thing I would tell a new podcaster. 100 episodes, that's how long it's going to take you to get comfortable.
Yeah, and that's like funny because I've been telling new students, this is the question I get the most. Is it too late in life to start comedy? I tell them it takes 100 gigs to kind of get your feet wet and decide if you've got a knack for it and kind of judge from the response if you do or not. Do you have every other night for the next year to go out and try comedy? Every third night of the year, can you find an open mic? If you can't, then you don't have enough time to make for it, but you've got enough time in your life. The older you get, you've got more stories, more experience, all that stuff.
Yeah. And let's be honest, it's a 7-minute gig, maybe a 3-minute gig when you start comedy. It's a lot of time, though, getting there, hanging out, waiting for all the other guys to do their 3-minute gigs, getting laughed off stage, laughed on stage, whatever happens, rewriting. That's a lot of time.
I tell you, it's funny you bring that up. I did a show in Santa Fe, New Mexico recently. All right, that's a pretty good travel day as it is. One of the best paying gigs I'd had in quite a while, and it was only for 7.5 minutes. 7.5 minutes. But it took me a full day and a half to get there and back.
Well, that's how I got the name of my blog, 23hours.com. I was hanging out with one of the guys from the Doobie Brothers, and he says, you don't pay me for the hour I'm on stage.
There you go.
The 23 hours that it takes to get there.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, what a great concept, because that's really what we're talking about here.
That and also the 23 years is what they're paying for.
Yeah,
and all that too. But yeah, that all the off stage time, you got to make good use of that time.
I know you're the comic here, but you've heard that old joke about the consultant, how he comes in, taps on whatever it is, like a gauge or something like that. It starts working, and he sends him a bill for $1,000. I said, $1,000? You just tapped on the gauge and it started working. What's going on? I'm sorry. It was the wrong invoice. Let me change that up. Said tapping on the gauge, $1. Knowing which gauge to tap, $999.
That's great.
And that's really what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to deliver exactly what they need. On demand, feeling good, feeling bad, whatever it might be.
Let's get into brevity a little bit. One of the problems I see with podcasters, they just go on and on and on. Even the big podcasters. The first Tim Ferriss podcast, I think it was 2 hours and 45 minutes. It was well over 2 hours.
His mind races so fast. I mean, and that's a lot of words per minute. He's not just I mean, he's putting a lot of words in it. I know what you mean. I've tried to listen to a few, and I just have to